ever spend like hours on a project only to have this one tiny bug totally throw everything off. Ugh, the worst.
The worst feeling.
So today's deep dive is all about how to avoid those moments, especially in game development. We're talking automated testing. It's like, seriously, your secret weapon to level up your game. Literally.
I like that.
We've got some really fascinating research papers here all about how to streamline your workflow, specifically using Unity.
Yeah, and it's more important now than ever. I mean, the gaming world is huge.
Huge.
Bigger than movies these days. But that also means there are more indie devs out there, so more competition.
Right.
Your process, especially testing, can really make you stand out in a crowded market.
Okay, so testing, I'm with you. But to be honest, I kind of think of it as that thing you do at the very end, like just to make sure nothing completely explodes when you launch. But this research paper, it frames it almost like building a stronger foundation from the very beginning.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. We're going way beyond just, does it crash? We're talking about different types of tests, each with its own specific purpose. Imagine you're building a feature for your game. Let's say a character's health points.
Okay, yeah, pretty standard stuff.
Right. But think about it. You can test just that health point code by itself, just making sure it functions how you want. We call that unit testing.
Okay.
But then you also have something called integration testing. That's where you see how that little piece of health point code interacts with, let's say, the entire combat system.
So does taking damage reduce their health the right way?
Exactly. Does it trigger, the right animations and sound effects? It's all about making sure all the pieces of your game are working together seamlessly.
So it's like, yeah, you need to make sure the car engine starts, but then you also need to make sure that actually makes the wheels turn.
100%. And that's actually where things get really interesting with this idea of test-driven development, or TDD. Have you ever come across that?
I've heard it. Yeah, the term gets thrown around. To be honest, it always sounded kind of intimidating, like something only hardcore coding gurus use.
I totally get that. It does seem a little counterintuitive, right? The basic idea is you write your test before you even write the code for that feature.
Wait, hold on. So you write the test before the code? How do you even know what to test for if the code isn't even there?
That's the beauty of it. By writing the tests first, you're actually forced to think about what you want that code to do. You're basically defining its behavior before you write a single line of code.
So it's almost like you're creating a blueprint, but like a really detailed plan for your code.
Exactly. And this research paper argues that taking that approach leads to cleaner and ultimately more reliable code. And it can actually really speed up development in the long run. It might seem strange at first, but having that roadmap laid out by those tests can be a game changer.
Okay, I'm definitely intrigued, but I'm also still a little skeptical. So how does TDD actually work in an actual game?
Well, this researcher documented how they used it to build a turn-based RPG. Kind of like, the classics Final Fantasy, Chrono Trigger.
Oh, nice. Love those games.
Yeah, they're classics for a reason.
So they used TDD for the entire game, from start to finish.
They did. And what's great is that they broke it down step by step. So you can actually see how they applied it to every aspect: hero attributes, enemy characters, the entire battle system.
Oh, wow. They went all in. All right, so let's break it down. Where did they even begin with the testing? Okay, so we're thinking about a classic RPG, heroes, enemies, all that. Where do you even begin with this TDD thing on a game like that, too?
So they started with, the heart of every RPG, right? The hero.
Makes sense.
Remember how we talked about unit testing? You're basically isolating pieces of code.
Yeah.
So they started by writing tests for the hero's attributes. Things like their health points, how much damage they can dish out, what happens when they, take a hit from an enemy.
Okay, so they're basically like laying down the law for how the hero should act in all these different situations.
Exactly. They're actually defining how that hero behaves before a single line of code for the hero even exists.
Yeah.
That's like the core idea behind TDD.
I get that it's supposed to make things cleaner, in the long run, but it's still kind of mind-blowing to think about writing tests for something that isn't even there yet.
It is a different way of thinking, that's for sure. It's kind of like, imagine this, instead of just starting to build a house by laying bricks,
Yeah.
you're creating the super detailed blueprint first. And that blueprint, it can save you from a lot of headaches and rebuilds later on.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So they've got all the hero stats covered. What's next on their TDD to-do list?
Well, I mean, heroes need actions, right?
Yeah.
Attack,
Yeah.
use items, maybe some special abilities.
Her.
This RPG, it had all the classic moves.
So did they write tests for each and every action? That just seems like a ton of work up front.
It definitely takes discipline, that's for sure. But you see, each test is laser focused. So for example, they would write a test just to make absolutely sure that a healing potion actually increases the hero's health.
Right.
And not just that it increases, but that it increases by the correct amount. Or they'd test that equipping a new sword actually boosts their attack power as intended.
Okay, so it's like they're setting the rules of the game world in stone through all these tests.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And because they're doing it this way with TDD, they're catching these tiny little logic errors right away before they snowball into these massive problems later on. It's like, having that safety net under the trapeze artist.
Right, right. Okay, so the hero's good to go, but what about the enemies? You got to make sure that they're actually challenging, especially as the game goes on.
You're hitting on a really crucial point, scaling difficulty. It's something they thought about a lot.
Yeah.
And yeah, they tackled it head on with TDD.
More tests before the code, even for the bad guys.
Oh, absolutely. They started by defining the different enemy types, all those classic RPG creatures.
Shurims, goblins.
Exactly. Maybe a dragon or two for good measure.
Gotta have a dragon. Classic.
Can't go wrong with a good dragon. So for each enemy type, they'd write tests, just what they did with the hero. Health points, attack power, special abilities, all of it. Everything gets put through the TDD ringer.
And I'm assuming the dragon's stats probably had a few more zeros than the slime.
Yeah, probably a few more zeros in there. But it goes beyond just setting those initial stats. They also wrote tests specifically to make sure that those enemy stats, they scaled properly as the game progressed.
So like as the player levels up, the enemies level up too.
Exactly. It's all about keeping things challenging. It's like a good workout, right? You want to feel the burn, but you don't want to totally collapse.
Yeah.
And here's what's cool, because they're using TDD for this. They can fine-tune that difficulty curve so precisely. They can run the tests, see exactly how those enemies are going to behave at different levels, and really tweak things to find that sweet spot of challenge.
This is kind of blowing my mind. So they're basically using TDD to handcraft that classic RPG experience.
Yes.
From those early kind of easy victories to those nail-biting boss fights.
That's exactly it. TDD, it's about so much more than just preventing bugs. It's about using code to design a better game, a more fun game from the ground up. And honestly, it doesn't have to be limited to RPGs.
Yeah.
These principles, they can apply to any game genre you can imagine.
It's really interesting stuff. Okay, so we've got these heroes, they're powered up, we've got our enemies, they're scaling, but we still haven't talked about the system that brings them all together, the battle system itself.
Right.
So how do you even begin to use TDD on something that complex? Right, so we're about to step into the arena, right into this RPG's battle system. And this is where, things get really complex, I think. You've got turns, actions, calculations, everything's happening. So where do you even begin with TDD on something this complex?
It's true.
Yeah.
The battle system, that's like the heart of the logic of the entire game, right?
Yeah.
But the beauty of TDD, it kind of forces you to break these huge tasks down into these smaller, more manageable chunks.
Okay, so instead of just trying to swallow the whole battle system at once, you're taking these bite-sized pieces.
Exactly. And they start with the most fundamental part of, any turn-based game, the turns themselves.
Okay.
So they write tests specifically to make sure that the turns alternate correctly. Hero goes, enemy goes, back and forth. Just like you'd expect.
So super basic hero's turn, enemy's turn, just back and forth.
Exactly. It's about making sure the foundation is rock solid because everything else builds on that.
Right. Got to have that solid TDD foundation. Okay, so once they've got the turn order set up, what's next? What do they tackle?
Actions? I mean, what's an RPG without a bunch of cool actions that characters can take, right?
Totally.
And this one was no exception attack, use a potion, defend, all that good stuff. And, of course, the enemies, they've got to have their own set of moves.
Right, got to have those big boss attacks. So for every single action, did they write a separate test? That's like a mountain of tests.
It can feel that way, but honestly, each test on its own, it's actually really, really focused, super specific. It's about making sure each action does exactly, and I mean exactly, what it's supposed to do. Nothing more, nothing less. So, for example, they might have a test for when the hero uses a basic attack, but it's not just checking that the attack animation plays, right? It's making sure that the enemy's health decreases by the correct amount, which means it's taking into account the hero's attack power and maybe any other modifiers or buffs that are in play.
Oh, wow. Okay, so it's not just that the attack button works, it's that all that underlying math is happening correctly.
Exactly. every single time. And this like meticulous approach, they apply it to every single action in the entire game for the hero, for all the enemies, everything. So by the time they're done, they've got this really impressive web of tests covering every possible action and how it plays out in a battle.
It's like they're running simulations of every possible fight in the game, but it's all happening in the code.
That's a really good way to put it. But there's actually like another whole layer to this. Remember how we talked about the enemies scaling in difficulty?
Yeah. They get tougher as you level up.
Right. So it's not enough to just give those enemies more hit points or stronger attacks. That wouldn't be very fun. They need to make sure that those increases in difficulty, they actually make sense in the context of an actual battle.
Right. You don't want to just like throw a superpowered enemy at the player out of nowhere.
Exactly. That's just bad game design. So they wrote these really clever tests to make sure that as the player levels up and they start encountering tougher and tougher enemies, the battles themselves actually feel more challenging.
Okay, so like that slime enemy at the beginning of the game, he might be a pushover when you're just starting out, but by the time you're at a higher level, he could actually put up a fight.
Exactly. Or, maybe there's a certain enemy ability that's like impossible to survive early on. But then once you've leveled up, you've got better gear, maybe you've learned some new skills, you can actually approach it strategically and overcome it.
It's really cool how they're using TDD to craft the player experience. From those early victories all the way to those crazy, epic boss battles.
That's what it's all about, right?
Yeah.
It's not just about making a game that works, it's about making a game that's fun to play. And TDD, it can help you do that. And honestly, this isn't limited to RPGs. These ideas, they can apply to any kind of game you can imagine.
Yeah, it's really opened my eyes. So, to everyone listening out there, we've got a challenge for you. What if you tried incorporating just one new testing technique into your next project, even if it's something small, like writing a few unit tests? You might be surprised at how much smoother your development process goes, and honestly, how much more confident you feel in your code. Who knows, maybe you'll discover a love for TDD. That's it for our deep dive into automated testing and game development. We'll catch you in the next episode, where we'll explore some other fascinating corner of the tech world.